She was 7 years old, alone in an alley on the coldest night of the year, and someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to make sure no one would ever find her. Logan Mercer almost didn't stop. He was exhausted, running on 4 hours of sleep, and all he wanted was to get home to his son. But something made him slow the truck, a shape beside a dumpster. Too small to be an adult, too still to be safe. What he found that night didn't just change his life. Cracked open a conspiracy buried inside one of the most powerful companies in the world and put every single one of them in the crosshairs of people who had already proven they were willing to let a child disappear forever. If this kind of story hits you somewhere deep, the kind that keeps you up at night because you can't stop thinking about what happens next, then hit subscribe right now and turn on notifications so you never miss a single one. We put out stories like this every week, and you don't want to be the one who finds out you missed it. And before you keep watching, drop a like and tell me in the comments what city and country you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Now let's go back to that alley. The last job of the year had run 3 hours over. Logan Mercer didn't complain about it. Complaining wasn't something he did much anymore. Not since the Navy, not since the marriage fell apart, but by the time he climbed into his truck at 9:30 on Christmas Eve, he was running on fumes and black coffee and the particular kind of tired that settles into your bones when you've been doing physical work in sub-freezing temperatures since 6 in the morning. He was a construction site foreman now, had been for 4 years. After 12 years as a Navy SEAL 2 combat deployments, 3 classified operations he still wasn't allowed to discuss, and a shoulder reconstruction that took 18 months to recover from. He'd come home to a wife who had quietly decided she didn't want the version of him that came back, a 6-month-old son he barely recognized, and a job market that didn't know what to do with a man whose entire skill set involved things that were largely illegal in civilian life. Construction had made sense. He was good with his hands. He was good at solving problems under pressure. He was good at keeping his mouth shut when something was difficult and just working through it until it wasn't difficult anymore. His crew liked him. His boss trusted him. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest, and Logan had learned to put a high value on honest. He texted his neighbor, Mrs. Kowalski, who watched his son Danny on late nights. Running behind. Be there by 10. Sorry. She texted back a single emoji, a thumbs up, which was the Mrs. Kowalski version of you're forgiven, but only barely. Danny was 6. He'd been asking for 2 weeks whether Santa was real, not in the innocent way kids ask when they're hoping for confirmation, but in the careful, squinting way that meant he was already building his case and just needed one more piece of evidence. Logan hadn't figured out what to tell him yet. He'd planned to think about it on the drive home. He turned onto Granger Street instead of taking the highway. It added 4 minutes to the drive, but the highway was a parking lot on Christmas Eve, everyone trying to get somewhere, everyone running late, and Granger Street cut through the old commercial district. Mostly shuttered warehouses and a strip of businesses that had closed during the recession and never reopened. No traffic, no stoplights after the first block. Just empty storefronts with plywood windows and a row of dumpsters lined up along the curb for the city's post-holiday bulk pickup. He'd driven this road 100 times. He almost didn't see her. She was tucked against the second dumpster from the corner. On the left side, practically invisible, a small, dark shape crouched low, wrapped in what looked like someone's discarded moving blankets, kind with the thin metallic lining that reflects body heat. She had pulled the edge of it up over her head so only a sliver of her face was visible. If she hadn't moved just a small shift, a repositioning, the kind of restless movement a child makes when they're trying to get comfortable, and Logan would have driven right past her. He braked hard enough that the truck skidded slightly on the wet pavement. Sat for a second. Looked again. Don't be an idiot, he thought. Probably a pile of trash. But he had spent 12 years in environments where you learned to trust the thing your eye caught at the edge of your vision, because the thing you dismissed as nothing was sometimes the thing that killed you. He put the truck in park. He got out. The cold hit him like a wall, 22 degrees, wind chill dropping it lower, the kind of night that made your nose run and your fingers ache within 30 seconds of exposure. He walked toward the dumpster, with his hands open and visible, moving slowly, the way you move toward anything small and frightened. Hey, he said, quietly, not a shout. Hey, I can see you there. I'm not going to hurt you. Nothing. The shape went completely still. I'm going to crouch down, okay? I just want to make sure you're all right. He crouched down about 6 feet away and waited. Through the edge of the blanket, he could see two eyes watching him. Dark eyes. Young eyes. He could see the shape of a small nose, a small chin tucked down against a small chest. A kid. 7, maybe 8. Definitely not older. It's really cold tonight, Logan said. I'm worried about you. Silence. Then, barely audible over the wind, I'm fine. The voice was a little girl's voice, trying very hard to sound certain and landing somewhere around terrified. Okay, Logan said. Can I ask your name? A long pause. No. Fair enough, he stayed crouched. Didn't move closer. My name's Logan. I've got a truck right there, it's warm. I was about to head home. My son is 6, his name is Danny, and he's been driving our neighbor absolutely crazy all day because he's too excited to sit still. Nothing from under the blanket. I'm not going to force you to do anything, Logan said. But I can't drive away and leave you out here. It's 22 degrees and it's going to get colder. So I'm just going to stay right here until you tell me something, anything that helps me understand what's going on. Another long silence. The wind picked up. Logan could feel it cutting through his jacket. Then the blanket shifted and she pulled it down from her face. She was small, smaller than he'd thought. Her face was pale from the cold, her cheeks carrying that particular redness that comes from prolonged exposure, and her hair was dark and tangled and slightly damp at the edges. She was wearing a winter coat, a good one, he noticed. Not the kind of coat a homeless child would have, but it was 2 sizes too big and the zipper was broken, so it hung open at the front. Under it was a sweater that had been washed so many times it had gone thin at the elbows. She looked at him with an expression that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite defiance. It was something in between the face of a child who had already decided that most adults were not to be trusted, but was still somewhere deep down, hoping she was wrong about that. Around her neck, on a thin silver chain, hung a small pendant. He could see the outline of it against her sweater. Some kind of engraved symbol, though he couldn't make it out in the dark. I'm not lost, she said. Her voice was steadier now. I know where I am. Okay, Logan said. Do you have somewhere to go tonight? Steadiness cracked, just for a second. Not right now. Are you hungry? She didn't answer, which was its own answer. Stood up slowly, turned to his truck, and opened the passenger door. He reached behind the seat and found what he was looking for, the paper bag from the sandwich place 3 blocks from the job site, which he hadn't had time to eat during his lunch break and had been planning to finish on the drive home. Turkey on sourdough, bag of chips, an apple. He walked back and set it on the ground beside her, then stepped back. She stared at it. Then she picked it up and opened it and ate the sandwich in about 45 seconds flat, the way a kid eats when they've been pretending they weren't hungry for a long time. She ate the chips too. She looked at the apple and then looked up at him. You can have that too, he said. She ate the apple. Core and all, almost to the stem. When she was done, she sat with the empty bag in her lap and looked at him with those same careful eyes. Please don't call the police, she said. Why not? She pressed her lips together, looked at the ground, then back up at him. Because they'll send me back. Send you back where? I can't tell you that. Logan crouched down again. His shoulder ached, it always ached in the cold, the metal plate the surgeons had installed, reminding him of itself in low temperatures. He ignored it. Okay, he said. Then just tell me, this is there someone looking for you right now? Someone who's worried about you? Something shifted in her face. A complicated thing. Maybe, she said. But not the people who should be. He didn't know what to make of that, but he believed her. 12 years reading people in high-pressure situations had given him a fairly reliable internal lie detector, and this child wasn't lying. She was scared, she was freezing, and she was carrying something she didn't know how to put down. Here's what I can do, Logan said. I can take you somewhere warm. My house. My son Danny is there. You can eat something real, get warm, and in the morning we can figure out what happens next. I'm not going to call anyone tonight without talking to you first. Okay? She studied him for a long time. He let her. He'd learned that from the SEAL teams, patience was a skill, not a trait. Could get comfortable with silence if you practiced it long enough. Okay, she finally said, quietly. like she was making herself say it before she changed her mind. He helped her up. She was lighter than she should have been. She carried nothing, no bag, no backpack, nothing which struck him as wrong in a way he couldn't yet articulate. A child who had been surviving on her own had no supplies. Either someone had been taking care of her until very recently, or she'd had to leave so fast she couldn't take anything with her. She climbed into the passenger seat and sat with her hands folded in her lap, very straight, very still, the way kids sit when they're in a place they don't know and they're trying not to take up too much space. Logan cranked the heat. "What's your name?" he asked again, pulling onto the road. This time, after a moment, Ivy. "Ivy," he repeated. "How old are you, Ivy?" 7. A pause. "I'll be 8 in March." He nodded, kept his eyes on the road. "You've been out here a while, haven't you?" It wasn't really a question. "A few days," she said. Then quieter. "Maybe more, Mrs." Kowalski, to her enormous credit, did not ask questions. She took one look at the small girl standing behind Logan in the doorway, said, "I'll put the kettle on," and walked to the kitchen without another word. She was 71 years old and had raised 5 children and possessed the particular competence of a woman who had spent decades solving problems that other people panicked about. Danny was still awake, because of course he was. He appeared at the top of the stairs in his pajamas, the ones with the rocket on them, and stared down at Ivy with his mouth slightly open. "Is she staying?" he asked. "For tonight," Logan said. "Does she want to see my Lego city? I've been building it since October." Logan looked at Ivy. Ivy looked up the stairs at Danny. Something crossed her face, a flicker of something real. Something that wasn't the careful guardedness she'd been wearing since the alley. "Okay," she said. So Danny showed her the Lego city, which occupied most of his bedroom floor and which he had named, he explained very seriously, Brickopolis. He showed her where the fire station was and where he was planning to put the airport once he got the right pieces. Ivy sat on the edge of his bed and listened with the attentiveness of a child who hadn't had anyone talk to her in a while. Mrs. Kowalski brought up 2 mugs of hot chocolate. She handed one to each of them, paused, looked at Ivy with the careful, assessing eye of a woman who had seen a thing or two in her time, and then patted Logan's arm twice on her way back to the door. "I'll see myself out," she said. After Danny had fallen asleep sometime around 11, still explaining something about the planned highway interchange on the east side of Brickopolis, Logan checked on Ivy, who was in the guest room. She was sitting up in the bed, the blankets pulled around her, looking at the pendant in her palm. "That's a nice piece of jewelry for a kid," Logan said from the doorway. She closed her hand around it. "It's important. I can see that." He leaned against the doorframe. "You don't have to tell me where it came from." "It was my mom's," she said, and then immediately looked like she hadn't meant to say that. Logan let it sit, didn't push. "Okay," he said. "Get some sleep. You're safe tonight." He started to pull the door closed. "Mr. Logan." Her voice was small. He stopped.
"Yeah?"
"Please don't send me back." The words came out all at once, like she'd been holding them, and had to let them go before she could sleep. "Please. I know you don't know me, and you don't know anything about what's happening. Please. Whatever you find out tomorrow, please don't just send me back." He stood there for a moment. The hallway was quiet. From Danny's room came the small sounds of a kid sleeping a shift, a murmur, the creak of the mattress. "Nobody's sending you anywhere tonight," Logan said. "Sleep." He closed the door. He went downstairs and sat at the kitchen table and looked at the wall for a long time, thinking. She wasn't a runaway. He was almost certain of that. Runaways had a particular energy reactive, twitchy, looking for the exit. Ivy was scared, but her fear was specific. It wasn't the free-floating fear of a child who'd fled an abusive home. It was the fear of a child who knew exactly what she was running from and exactly how bad it would be if she was caught. Hidden. That was what his gut told him. Someone had been hiding her, and something had gone wrong, and now she was alone. Pendant. It was my mom's. She'd said it and then tried to take it back. He thought about the symbol engraved on it. He'd caught a glimpse of it when she was sitting in the geometric precise, not the kind of thing you put on a piece of costume jewelry. That was real silver, real craftsmanship, the kind of thing that cost money. He thought about calling the police. He'd told her he wouldn't tonight, and he'd meant it not as a strategy, but as a promise and he kept his promises. Tomorrow was a different conversation. There were procedures for this. He understood that, but he also understood that something about this situation was not what it appeared to be on the surface, and that the standard procedure might not be the safe one. He'd learned that lesson in a different context, in a different country, a long time ago. The obvious play wasn't always the right one. Sometimes the situation you were looking at was designed to make you move in a particular direction, and the smart thing was to stop, back up, and figure out why. He went to bed. He didn't sleep much. In the morning, Ivy came downstairs to find Danny already at the table, eating cereal, and talking to nobody in particular about whether reindeer were scientifically capable of sustained flight given their body weight. She sat down across from him and, after a moment of listening, said, very matter-of-factly, that they probably weren't, but that wasn't really the point. Danny considered this and agreed that it wasn't really the point. Logan stood at the counter making coffee and watched the two of them and thought about the pendant and what the symbol on it might mean, and what a 7-year-old girl who'd been hiding in an alley on Christmas Eve was really running from. He had a feeling he was going to need to find out before someone else did. Coffee was still hot when Logan sat down at the kitchen table with his laptop and a legal pad and the particular focused quiet of a man who had trained himself to think clearly when everything around him was telling him not to. Danny and Ivy were in the living room. He could hear them, Danny narrating something about Brickopolis, Ivy asking questions in that careful way she had, like she was genuinely curious but didn't want to seem like she was enjoying herself too much. It was Christmas morning. Logan had wrapped 3 presents for Danny the night before. After the kids fell asleep, a remote control car, a set of engineering blocks, and a book about deep-sea creatures that Danny had dog-eared at the library twice. Small pile. Honest pile. Danny had learned not to expect much, which was one of those parenting realities that Logan carried around like a stone in his chest. He'd put a small wrapped thing beside Danny's pile for Ivy, too. Stuffed bear he'd found in the hall closet, one of those impulse purchases from a gas station 2 years ago that had never made it to anyone. It wasn't much, but he hadn't wanted her to sit there watching Danny open things with nothing of her own. He pulled up his browser and stared at the legal pad for a moment before writing anything. What he knew, one girl, approximately 7 years old. Name Ivy, last name unknown. Discovered alone on Granger Street at approximately 9:40 p.m. on December 24th. Good quality coat, broken zipper, undersized sweater, no bag, no supplies. Well-spoken. Not malnourished exactly, but clearly hadn't eaten properly in days. Fear response specifically triggered by mention of authorities and being sent back. Silver pendant on a chain engraved symbol, geometric, high quality. Her words, it was my mom's. Follow-up, please don't send me back. Not a runaway. Not a typical homeless child situation. Someone had been keeping her somewhere, and something had broken down. He drew a circle around the word pendant and stared at the symbol he'd sketched from memory. He wasn't an artist. The sketch was rough, but he'd spent enough hours in field operations drawing maps and marking positions from memory that he trusted his recall. The symbol was a stylized letter, or what looked like one enclosed in a geometric frame. Angular. Clean. The kind of design that belonged on a company logo, not a child's jewelry. He typed the description into the search bar and got nothing useful. He tried an image search, uploading his rough sketch after photographing it with his phone. The results were all over the place: corporate logos, architectural symbols, military insignia, none of them matching. He went back to the living room. Ivy was sitting cross-legged on the floor next to Danny, holding the stuffed bear against her chest without seeming to realize she was doing it. Danny was demonstrating the structural integrity of the Brickopolis Central Tower by pushing on it very gently, and then looking alarmed and then looking relieved when it didn't fall. Ivy, Logan said, "Can I see your pendant for a second?" She looked up at him. Her hand went to it automatically, not aggressive, not panicked, just instinctive. The way you move your hand to something you don't want to lose. "I'm not going to take it," he said. "I just want to look at the symbol." She hesitated. Then she pulled the chain over her head and held it out to him. He took it carefully. The chain was real silver, he could tell by the weight and the slight tarnish at the clasp. The pendant itself was about the size of a quarter, circular, with a raised symbol in the center. Up close, he could see it clearly. Two overlapping geometric shapes, a diamond inside a hexagon, with a small stylized letter in the middle. The letter was an A, or something that had evolved from an A, rendered in a clean, modern typeface. He took a photo of it with his phone, sharp, clear, close up. "Thank you," he said, and handed it back. She put it on immediately. Back at the kitchen table, he uploaded the photo and ran it through the image search again. This time he got a result in the third row. He clicked on it. The website was a business profile page, the kind that aggregated corporate information. The logo matched almost exactly, with minor stylistic differences. The name next to it read Vance Technologies International. He sat back. He knew the name. Most people who read any kind of news knew the name. Vance Technologies was one of those companies that appeared constantly in the margins of stories about artificial intelligence, logistics software, medical data systems, the kind of infrastructure company that didn't make consumer products, but whose platforms quietly ran underneath things that everyone used. It was a big company, global, the kind that had a market cap that felt more like a country's GDP than a business valuation. He searched for the CEO. The results came up fast. Aurelia Vance, 30, CEO and founder of Vance Technologies International. There were photos of a woman with dark hair, sharp features, particular kind of composed expression that people in her position learned to wear in public. Young to be running something that size. The articles mentioned it constantly, in that slightly condescending way business press handled women who succeeded faster than the timeline said they should. He read for 20 minutes. Built the company from a software platform she'd coded herself at 22. Took it public at 26. Strategic acquisitions, a few bruising proxy fights, the kind of professional history that didn't leave much room for anything personal. Then he found an older article, 3 years old, buried 4 pages back in the search results, which meant nobody was actively pushing it to the surface. Vance Technologies CEO Aurelia Vance mourns private tragedy after fatal plane accident. He read it carefully. The plane had been a private charter, a small one. It had gone down in bad weather over a remote stretch of Montana 2 days after Christmas 3 years ago. There were 2 passengers listed, a woman named Celeste Harmon, identified in the article as a family associate, and 1 child. The child was not named in the article minor protection laws, but was described as Aurelia Vance's daughter. The wreckage had been recovered. No survivors. Aurelia Vance had released a brief statement expressing grief and requesting privacy. Logan read the article twice. Then he sat very still. Then he looked toward the living room, where a 7-year-old girl named Ivy was sitting on his floor holding a stuffed bear, wearing a pendant that carried the logo of Aurelia Vance's company. Picked up his phone and called his old teammate. Marcus Webb had been his spotter on 2 deployments and currently worked private security in Chicago. Marcus answered on the 3rd ring, which meant he was awake but not quite voluntarily. "Merry Christmas," Marcus said in a tone that suggested he wasn't sure it was. "I need a favor," Logan said. "I need you to look something up for me." "It's Christmas morning, man." "I know. I'm sorry." "It's important." A pause. The sound of Marcus sitting up. "What do you need?" "Aurelia Vance, CEO of Vance Technologies. 3 years ago, she apparently lost a daughter in a plane crash. I need to know everything about that accident that isn't in the public record. Specifically, whether there was any question about the identification of remains." Silence on the other end. "Logan," Marcus said. "What's going on?" "I found a kid last night. I don't know who she is, but I think I might. And if I'm right, then someone has been lying about something for 3 years." Another silence, longer. "Give me a few hours." "Thank you." He set the phone down and looked at his notes. His hand wasn't entirely steady, which was unusual for him. He pressed it flat on the table and breathed. He needed to talk to Ivy. He waited until Danny had fallen into the distracted happiness of the remote control car to take Ivy to the kitchen. Poured her a glass of orange juice, which she accepted with both hands, the way small children do when they're being careful with something, and he sat down across from her at the table. "I need to ask you some things," he said, "and I need you to be as honest with you can. You don't have to tell me everything, but what you do tell me, it needs to be true. Okay?" She looked at him steadily, nodded. "How long were you out there?" "On Granger Street." 4 nights, she said, "maybe 5. I lost track." He didn't let the reaction show on his face. 5 nights in December, in temperatures that didn't break 25 degrees. Where were you before that? She looked at the table. With a woman named Darlene. She had an apartment near the bus station. She'd been taking care of me. Taking care of you, Logan repeated carefully. For how long? A long time. Ivy traced her thumbnail along the edge of the table. Told me it wasn't safe to go anywhere. She told me there were people looking for me who would hurt me if they found me. She said she was protecting me, and then she stopped coming back. The words were flat. Not emotionless, she'd just said them so many times in her own head that they'd worn smooth. I waited for 3 days. She left food the last time she came. When it was gone, I went outside. Logan let that sit for a moment. A woman named Darlene, an apartment near the bus station. A child kept inside for how long? He didn't know yet. Long enough that a long time was how Ivy measured it. Did Darlene ever tell you your last name? He asked. Ivy looked up at him quickly. A little too quickly. My name is Ivy, she said. That's all. It wasn't all. And they both knew it, but he didn't push, not on that. Pendant, he said. The symbol on it. Did Darlene give that to you? No, Ivy's hand went to it again, automatically. I've always had it. Darlene said it was the one thing she was told to make sure I never lost. Who told her that? A long pause. I don't know. Darlene didn't tell me a lot of things. She said it was safer if I didn't know them. She looked up at him then, and there was something in her face that wasn't quite resentment, but was close to it. She said that a lot, that it was safer. But I didn't always believe her. Smart kid, Logan thought. Scared, isolated, running on information given to her by someone who might not have been entirely honest with her, and still skeptical enough to notice the gaps. That kind of instinct couldn't be taught. You either had it or you didn't. Ivy, he said. Do you remember anything from before Darlene? Anything at all? Quiet for a long time, long enough that he thought she might not answer. I remember a house, she finally said, a big one, with tall windows, and a garden, not like a flower garden, but like the kind with walls around it. Stone walls. She paused, and a woman. She smelled like I don't know. Something warm, like wood and something sweet. She used to sing, but I can't remember what the song was. She stopped, pressed her lips together. That's all. Everything else is just Darlene's apartment. Logan nodded slowly. He thought about the article. Aurelia Vance's daughter. The plane crash. The recovered wreckage. The brief statement requesting privacy. He thought about the pendant. He thought about what it would take to fake a plane crash and make a billionaire CEO believe her daughter was dead. The scale of it made his stomach turn over. Not in disbelief, he'd seen operations built on that kind of deception, back when he was doing things that required a high security clearance and a willingness to spend long nights not thinking about what he was part of. He knew that kind of thing was possible. He knew it happened. But why? Why take a child and hide her? What was the point of making Aurelia Vance think her daughter was dead? He didn't have an answer yet, but he was going to find one. Okay, he said. He stood up, picked up her empty juice glass, and set it in the sink. Here's where we are. I found something this morning that I need to check out before I do anything. I'm not calling anyone today, but tomorrow we're probably going to need to have a harder conversation about what happens next. Ivy watched him. Did you find out who I am? He looked at her for a moment. I think I might have, but I want to be sure before I say anything. Is that okay? She considered this with the seriousness of someone much older. Are you going to send me back to the people Darlene was afraid of? No, he said, without hesitation. That's not happening. She nodded once, slid off the chair, and went back to the living room to watch Danny crash the remote control car into the baseboards with what appeared to be increasing enthusiasm. Marcus called back at 4 in the afternoon. Logan stepped out onto the back porch, into the cold, pulling the door half closed behind him so he could hear. Okay, Marcus said. He sounded different than he had in the morning. Less half asleep, more careful. The Vance plane crash. Official record is clean. FAA investigation closed, cause listed as controlled flight into terrain due to instrument failure in low visibility conditions. Wreckage consistent with impact and post-impact fire. Human remains recovered and identified. Identified how? Dental records for the adult, the Harmon woman. For the child, Marcus paused. DNA, sample provided by the Vance family legal team. matched against a profile on file with the family's private medical records. Logan stood in the cold with the phone against his ear. Who provided the DNA sample for the child? The legal team. Which means the sample could have come from anywhere. From anyone who had access to the child's personal items, hairbrushes, whatever. Another pause. Logan. The identification process for the child took 11 days. Normal turnaround for the adult. The child took 11 days, and the medical examiner who processed it retired 6 months later. Private practice. Nice one. I don't know what any of that means, but it's sitting wrong with me. It was sitting wrong with Logan, too. Is there anything in the records about who chartered the plane? Corporate account. A subsidiary of advanced technologies vendor. Very clean. Almost too clean to be suspicious, which is its own kind of suspicious. Marcus's voice dropped slightly. The other thing there were 3 search and rescue teams deployed to the crash site. One of them filed a supplemental report noting that the child's remains were, and I'm quoting here, inconsistent with full impact exposure. The medical examiner's office logged the report, and then it just kind of disappears from the chain. Wasn't included in the final investigation file. Logan closed his eyes for a second. Cold was biting at the back of his neck. He barely noticed. Marcus, he said, I think this kid survived the crash. I think someone pulled her out and hid her and made the identification process point to death. Yeah, Marcus said. I think so too. The question is who and why, and those are the kinds of questions that tend to get people hurt. I know. You going to contact Vance? I'm going to try to figure out the safest way to do that first, Logan said. The pendant matches her company's early logo, pre-IPO version. Someone gave that to this child deliberately, which means someone wanted there to be a trail. Wanted someone to be able to find out who she was. Darlene, Marcus said. Maybe. Or whoever sent Darlene. Logan exhaled a cloud of breath into the air. I need a day. I need to think about how to approach this without walking straight into whatever trap is already set. Yeah, well. Marcus paused. Be careful, man. If someone went to this much trouble to make a billionaire's kid disappear, they're not going to be happy about her turning up. Logan went back inside. Ivy was asleep on the couch, the stuffed bear tucked under one arm, her dark hair spread across the cushion. Danny had draped one of the living room throw blankets over her, with the solemnity of someone performing an important task. He was now on the floor nearby, building something with his engineering blocks and whispering to himself. Logan stood in the doorway and looked at his son for a moment. 6 years old, building cities on his bedroom floor, explaining aerodynamics to a girl he'd known for less than a day. Just doing the decent thing because it hadn't occurred to him not to. He thought about what Marcus had said, the kinds of questions that tend to get people hurt. He'd been hurt before. It hadn't killed him, but he wasn't the only one in this house now. He went upstairs and pulled the lockbox from the top shelf of his closet. His service weapon was inside a Glock 19, legally licensed, cleaned and maintained out of habit rather than expectation. He checked it, confirmed the magazine, and set it on the nightstand. Then he sat on the edge of the bed and spent the rest of the evening thinking through scenarios the way he'd been trained to do, working backward from outcomes, identifying choke points, mapping what he knew against what he didn't. He made a decision before he fell asleep. He would reach out to Aurelia Vance carefully, through channels that didn't announce who he was or what he had. He would find a way to verify, without tipping his hand to anyone who might be monitoring her communications. And he would keep Ivy exactly where she was until he knew it was safe to move her. He didn't expect anyone to move first. The sound came at 2:17 a.m., not a crash, not a forced entry. Something quieter and more deliberate, the careful movement of someone who knew what they were doing, who had assessed the entry points of the house and chosen the one least likely to be alarmed. The kitchen window, which Logan had meant to fit with a secondary lock for 6 months and hadn't gotten around to. He was off the bed and across the room before he was fully awake. His body remembered things his conscious mind had to catch up to. He didn't turn on any lights. He moved down the hallway in the dark, sock feet on hardwood, breathing controlled, gun in his right hand. He heard the sound again from downstairs, the careful placement of feet on the kitchen floor. Someone who moved like they had done this before. Logan descended the stairs using the left edge of each step, the side that didn't creak. He'd mapped that out in the first week after he moved in. the way he mapped everything. Old habit, useful tonight. He reached the bottom landing and pressed himself against the wall. Kitchen was dark except for the light of the microwave clock. In that faint green glow, he could see a shape near the hallway that led to the back of the house. A person, medium build, moving slowly, deliberately, sweeping the room with their eyes in the systematic way that meant training, not improvisation. They weren't looking for valuables. They were looking at the living room, at the couch. Logan came around the corner of the wall fast, weapon up. "Stop," he said, flat voice, no performance. The figure spun. Logan caught a glimpse male, dark clothing, something in the right hand that he dropped immediately, and then the figure was moving, not at Logan, but away from him, back toward the kitchen window. Fast, faster than Logan expected, he went after him. Not shooting, there were children sleeping 20 feet above his head, but going hard, reaching the kitchen in time to see the figure go through the open window in one clean motion, dropping to the side yard and running. Logan went to the window and looked out. The yard was dark. He could hear footsteps on the frozen ground, then a car engine 2 streets over, starting and pulling away without lights. He stood there with the gun at his side, breathing. He looked back into the living room. Ivy was sitting up on the couch. He heard it. She was holding the stuffed bear with both arms, knees pulled up, watching him with those dark eyes that had already seen too much. "Was that someone looking for me?" she asked. He could lie to her. She was 7. It would have been easy to do. "Yes," he said. "I think so." She didn't cry. She just sat there holding the bear, and he could see her working through it, the way she'd worked through everything else, not pretending it wasn't terrifying, but not falling apart either. 7 years old, sitting in a stranger's living room at 2 in the morning, after someone had broken in trying to find her, and she was holding herself together by sheer stubborn will. "They're going to keep looking, aren't they?" she said. "Not a question. Not from here," Logan said. "We're going somewhere safer tomorrow. Early, before it's light." She nodded. He went to the couch and sat down beside her. Not touching, just present. After a moment, she leaned sideways and put her head against his arm. He sat there in the dark kitchen, and he thought about the item the intruder had dropped, a small device he'd picked up from the kitchen floor after going back in. A phone, prepaid burner, no contacts, no messages. But on the lock screen, because the person had been using it recently, was a pulled-up image. A photo of Ivy. Clear. Recent. She looked younger in it by maybe a year, but it was unmistakably her. Someone had given this man a photograph of a child and sent him to retrieve her, which meant someone knew or suspected that she was alive and findable, which meant the break-in wasn't random, and it wasn't an opportunist. It was a message, or an attempt, and it told Logan one thing clearly: whoever had orchestrated the disappearance of Aurelia Vance's daughter hadn't just hidden her. They were still watching, still maintaining her absence, still willing to act on it, which meant the danger wasn't behind Ivy. It was still very much ahead of her. He sat with her until she fell back asleep, and then he went to the kitchen table and sat there until the sky outside the window turned from black to gray, and he started making a list of everything that needed to happen next. Top of it, he wrote 2 words: Aurelia Vance. He was going to have to find a way to reach her, quietly, through a route that nobody was already watching, and he was going to have to do it without knowing who inside her world had helped make her daughter disappear. Because one thing was now absolutely certain: this wasn't a missing child case. It had never been a missing child case. It was something that had been planned by someone close enough to Aurelia Vance to access her family's private medical records, to charter a plane through 4 layers of corporate shell, and to arrange for a 7-year-old girl to vanish so completely that her own mother had spent 3 years believing she was dead. Logan looked at his list, looked at the gray morning forming outside his window. He thought about Ivy asleep on his couch with a gas station stuffed bear, and Danny asleep upstairs dreaming about his Lego city, and the man who had dropped a burner phone in his kitchen at 2 in the morning and run for a car parked 2 streets away. He thought about the 12 years he'd spent being sent into impossible situations by people who believed the mission mattered more than the cost. This time the mission was his. He picked up the pen and kept writing. He moved them before sunrise. Logan woke Danny at 5 in the morning, which Danny accepted with the confused compliance of a 6-year-old who understood that when his father used that particular voice, questions came later. Logan packed a bag for each of them in under 10 minutes: clothes, medications, Danny's favorite engineering blocks, because leaving them would have started a conversation he didn't have time for. He packed the burner phone the intruder had dropped in a Ziploc bag. Evidence. The kind you didn't leave sitting on a kitchen table. Ivy came downstairs already dressed, the stuffed bear tucked under one arm and the pendant inside her shirt where it didn't show. She hadn't been told to do either of those things. She'd just done them. Logan noticed that and filed it away without comment. He drove them to Marcus's cousin's house on the east side of the city, a 2-bedroom rental occupied by a woman named Bet, who worked night shifts at a distribution warehouse and wasn't home until 7. Marcus had texted the address at 4 a.m. along with, "She knows you're coming. Don't touch the fridge on the left. That's her roommate's." Logan had called Marcus back and told him about the intruder. Marcus had been quiet for a moment and then said, "I'll make some calls." That was the most either of them needed to say about it. Betta's house was small and smelled like laundry detergent and old carpet, and it was warm, and it had a deadbolt on the front door and a back entrance that faced an alley. Logan had already mapped on his phone while driving over. He settled Danny on the couch with his blocks and a bowl of cereal he found in the cabinet and a cartoon on the small television. Ivy sat at the kitchen table. Logan sat across from her. "I need to ask you something harder than the questions from yesterday," he said. She set the bear on the table in front of her, like she was arranging a negotiation. "Okay, the woman who kept you, Darlene." He kept his voice even. "Did she ever say us anything about why she was protecting you? Who she was protecting you from?" Ivy looked at the bear. She said there were men who worked for a very powerful person. And that person wanted things to go a certain way, and she said I was in the way of that. She paused. She said if those men found me, I would disappear. "For real this time." Logan kept his face neutral. "For real this time," he repeated. "So she knew you'd already been made to disappear once." Ivy met his eyes. She knew everything. She just didn't tell me most of it. "Did she ever mention a name? Anyone's name at all?" A long pause, long enough that he could see her actually searching, not stalling. "She said something once. She was on the phone and she didn't know I could hear. She said Hargrove won't stop just because you ask him nicely." Ivy said the name carefully, like she'd been carrying it without knowing what it was. "I don't know who that is." Logan wrote it down. Hargrove. A last name or a first name, he didn't know yet, but it was something. "Ivy," he said, "I'm going to tell you what I found. And I need you to be ready for it to be a lot." She straightened slightly. "Okay, I think your mother is alive," he said. "And I think she's been looking for you. And the only way she knew how, which is to say, she's been grieving you. Because someone made her believe you were dead." The silence that followed was the kind that had weight. He could see Ivy processing it, the way you process something that is too large to understand all at once, something that has to be taken in pieces. "What's her name?" Ivy asked. Her voice was very quiet. "Aurelia," he said. "Aurelia Vance." Something crossed Ivy's face. A flicker of something, not recognition exactly, more like the shadow of recognition, the feeling of a word you know but can't quite place. She put her hand over the pendant through her shirt. "How do you know?" she asked. "The symbol on the pendant. It's her company's logo, an early version of it, and there are other things, details that line up. I'm not 100% certain yet, but I'm close." Ivy sat with that for a moment. "Does she know about me? That I'm here?" "Not yet," Logan said. "I'm trying to figure out the safest way to reach her. Because the people who hid you from her, I think some of them are still close to her. And if I contact her the wrong way, the wrong people find out before she does." Ivy nodded slowly. She understood, in the way that children who have been living inside adult danger for too long understand things they shouldn't have to. "So what do you do?" "I work the problem," Logan said. "That's what I do." Marcus arrived at Bennett's house at 9 that morning with 2 coffees and a folder. He was 6'2", broad-shouldered, with the kind of calm that came from having been in enough genuinely terrible situations that most things no longer felt worth losing composure over. He shook Logan's hand, looked at Ivy, looked at Danny, and said, "You got yourself into something." "Yeah," Logan said. You're not surprised about that? No. They sat at the kitchen table with the folder between them, while Ivy kept Danny occupied in the other room with a stack of paper she was using to draw increasingly elaborate maps of Brickopolis. Marcus opened the folder. I spent the night working this. The woman Darlene, she almost certainly isn't alive. I ran the address you pulled from what Ivy told you, the bus station area, canvassed what I could remotely. There's a Darlene Marsh who rented a unit in that building, under a fake ID, approximately 3.5 years ago. She cleared out about a week ago, left almost everything behind. Almost everything, except her files. Someone tossed that apartment before building management noticed she was gone. Professionally, not ransacked, sorted through, and cleared. He tapped the folder. The fake ID she used? It traces back to a documentation network that's been used 3 times in the last 5 years in connection with 2 federal cases involving corporate espionage. Both cases were settled quietly. Both involved a company called Hargrove Meridian Capital. Logan picked up the folder and read. Hargrove Meridian Capital was an investment and asset management firm with significant stakes in 12 publicly traded companies. The largest single stake was in Vance Technologies International 14% of outstanding shares, accumulated gradually over the past 4 years, through a combination of direct purchase and derivative instruments. He thought about Ivy's words from the morning. Hargrove won't stop just because you ask him nicely. Who runs it, he said. A man named Elliot Hargrove, Marcus said. 53. Career in finance and corporate law before he launched the fund. He sits on the board of 2 companies, both of them with overlapping interests to Vance Tech. He's been on Aurelia Vance's board as an independent director for 3 years. Logan set the folder down. 3 years, the same window as the plane crash. The same window as Ivy's disappearance. He thought about the structure of what he was looking at. An investment firm with a major stake in Vance Technologies. A board member with insider access. A plane crash that killed or appeared to kill the CEO's only child. And the CEO herself still running the company, still controlling the majority vote, but alone now. Grieving, without a successor. He didn't know corporate law well enough to see the full shape of it yet. But he could see the outline. If Aurelia Vance died without a direct heir and without a will that named one clearly, who controlled her company's future? Who moved into the vacuum? I need a corporate attorney, he said. I know one, Marcus said. Friend of mine. She does securities work. I'll call her today. I also need to weigh into Aurelia Vance that doesn't go through any channel Hargrove can monitor. Marcus looked at him. You're going to go directly to her. I don't have another option. Whatever's inside her security team, whatever access Hargrove has to her communications, I go around all of it. Direct contact in person, ideally. She has a security detail. I know. I'll figure it out. Logan picked up his coffee. It had gone lukewarm. He drank it anyway. I need to know where she is. Not her office. Somewhere less controlled. Marcus was already pulling out his phone. Give me a few hours. He found what he needed by mid-afternoon. Aurelia Vance, it turned out, was not in her office during the week between Christmas and New Year's. She was at her family home, a property she'd owned since before the company went public, a converted farmhouse outside the city that her assistant's calendar, which Marcus had accessed through a chain of social engineering that Logan chose not to ask too much about, listed as her standing retreat during the holiday closure. The property was gated. She had a security team. There were cameras, none of which was insurmountable. Logan spent 2 hours on the phone with Marcus's attorney friend, a sharp, direct woman named Patricia Ossie, who had 15 years in securities law and asked exactly the right questions with exactly the right amount of controlled urgency. He laid out what he had: the investment stake, the board membership, the timing of Ivy's disappearance relative to the corporate structure, and listened while she explained the rest. Under the terms of Aurelia Vance's existing estate documents, which were a matter of public record at the time of filing, her daughter had been named as the primary beneficiary of both her personal estate and her controlling share arrangement in the company. Upon the daughter's death, officially declared 3 years ago, those arrangements had entered a pending state, never fully resolved, because Aurelia had not yet updated the documents. Patricia's theory, stated in the clipped, careful way of someone who'd learned to be careful with theories, was that an unresolved succession structure created specific windows of vulnerability. If Aurelia were to die or become incapacitated without an heir, control of her shares would move through a trustee arrangement, and the trustee named in the original documents was a corporate law firm with existing financial relationships with Hargrove Meridian Capital. Logan listened to all of it. When Patricia finished, he said, "So making the daughter disappear didn't immediately hand anyone anything, but it set up the conditions." "Correct," Patricia said. "You remove the heir, you create a succession gap, and then you position yourself to step into it when the time is right. The most likely trigger would be a crisis in the company, something that destabilizes her position as CEO and forces a board vote. With 14% of shares and the right relationships on the board, you could engineer a vote of no confidence, remove her from operational control, and move in before she could fight it. Has anything like that been building?" A pause. "There's a shareholder meeting in March. There's been quiet talk, not in the press, but in certain circles, of a challenge to her leadership over an acquisition she's been pursuing. The acquisition is unpopular with some investors. Hargrove Meridian has been publicly neutral, but if they switched position and brought 2 or 3 other institutional holders with them." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Logan thanked her and hung up. He understood the shape of it now. All of it. Not every detail, not every mechanism, but the architecture. Someone had looked at Aurelia Vance's company, at her personal life, at the one human vulnerability. She had a small child who was everything to her and had engineered a long game. Slow, patient, built to be invisible until it was already done. What they hadn't accounted for was Darlene Marsh, whoever she really was, keeping the child alive and keeping that pendant around her neck. What they hadn't accounted for was a former SEAL driving down Granger Street instead of taking the highway on Christmas Eve. Small things, the kind of things that brought large plans apart. He went to Aurelia Vance's property on the morning of December 27th, alone. He'd left Danny with Marcus at Betta's house, and Ivy with them, with instructions that Marcus had received in the tone that meant they weren't optional. He'd driven the borrowed car Marcus's, registered to a holding company that didn't trace to anyone easily, to a turnoff half a mile from the gate, and walked the rest of the way through a stretch of snow-patched field that ran alongside the property's fence line. He wasn't trying to breach the security. He was trying to be seen by it. He stood at the fence line and held up his phone with a photograph displayed on the screen. Pendant, clear detailed, the symbol facing outward. He stood there for 45 seconds. A camera moved. He could see it, the subtle mechanical rotation of the unit mounted on the fence post nearest to him, adjusting its angle. Put the phone down, took 3 steps back so he was clearly in frame and not attempting entry, and waited. It took 11 minutes. A door opened in the side of the main house, and a man in a dark jacket came across the property to the fence line. Security, professional. He assessed Logan through the fence, with the look of someone who knew what assessed meant. "You need to leave this property," the man said. "I need to speak with Ms. Vance," Logan said. "My name is Logan Mercer. I'm not here to cause any problem." "I have information about her daughter." The guard's expression didn't change. "Ms. Vance doesn't have a daughter." "She does," Logan said. "And she's alive. And I need to tell Ms. Vance that before the people who hid her find out where she is." The guard looked at him for a long moment. Logan met his eyes and stood still and let the man read him, because a man with training could tell the difference between someone who was performing calm and someone who actually had it. "Wait here," the guard said. Logan waited. 23 minutes later, the gate opened. The house was warm and simply furnished for what it was, a wealthy woman's retreat that still managed to feel like a home instead of a display. There were books stacked sideways on shelves because there wasn't room to stand them up. There were 2 pairs of rain boots by the back door, one pair much smaller than the other, which told him something that made his chest ache without warning. Someone had kept a pair of small boots. 3 years later, they were still there. Aurelia Vance was standing in the middle of the main room when they brought him in. She was smaller than he'd expected. The photographs all had her at press events, behind podiums, in the controlled context of someone managing their public image, and in those she read as formidable. In person, on a Tuesday morning in her own home, she was a 30-year-old woman in a gray sweater and dark jeans, her hair pulled back without much attention paid to it, and she looked like she hadn't slept easily in a very long time. There was a quality to her stillness that Logan recognized not peace, but the careful management of a person who had learned to hold very difficult things without putting them down. She looked at him with dark eyes that were guarded and tired, and underneath both of those, so precisely and specifically alert that he understood immediately she had not survived what she'd survived by being anything less than very sharp. "Mr. Mercer," she said. Her voice was even controlled. "My head of security tells me you said something about my daughter." "My daughter died 3 years ago." "No," Logan said. "She didn't." The word landed in the room. He watched Aurelia Vance absorb it. He watched her face do something complicated, not collapse. Not open, but something in between, a fracture along a line that had been holding for a very long time. "Sit down," she said. Her voice had changed. "Not much. Just slightly." He sat. He told her everything. All of it, from Granger Street forward the alley. The pendant, the research, the plane crash irregularities. The intruder, Patricia Osai's analysis, the name Hargrove. Darlene Marsh. He spoke for 20 minutes without stopping. He laid out what he knew and what he'd inferred and where the gaps were, and he told her which parts were solid and which parts were still theory, because she deserved to know the difference. She listened without interrupting. She sat in the chair across from him, with her hands clasped in her lap and her face very controlled, and she listened to the whole thing. When he finished, the room was quiet. "The pendant," she said finally. "Describe it again." He described it. The silver chain, the circular pendant, the symbol diamond inside hexagon, stylized A in the center. Aurelia stood up. She walked to a small cabinet against the far wall, opened the top drawer, and took out a photograph. She brought it to him. It was a personal photo, not a professional one. A woman in her mid-20s crouching in a garden with a small child in her arms. The child was maybe 4 years old, dark-haired, caught mid-law. Around the child's neck, clear in the image, was a small pendant on a silver chain. "I had it made for her 2nd birthday," Aurelia said. "A jeweler I've used since my mother's time. The design is a version of the logo I was using when the company was still just a concept. Before I went public, before any of the formal branding. I've never used it anywhere official. Nobody outside of my personal circle would have recognized it." Her voice was steady. She was working very hard to keep it steady. "Where is she?" "Safe," Logan said. "Somewhere Hargrove's people haven't found yet. But I need to understand your security situation before I bring her here." Something shifted in Aurelia's expression. "You think someone on my team is compromised. I think the access required to orchestrate what was done to your daughter had to come from somewhere close to you. The charter plane, the medical records for the DNA identification, the timing, all of it required inside knowledge. I don't know who, and I don't know how deep it goes. Until I do, I'm not moving her through any channel I can't personally verify." Aurelia looked at him for a long moment. He could see her cycling through it, the instinct to take control, to summon her own resources, to handle it the way she handled everything, and then the check against that. The recognition that her own resources were exactly what couldn't be trusted right now. It was a hard thing to accept. He could see that too. "What do you need from me?" she said. "The names of everyone who had access to your family's private medical records 3.5 years ago. Everyone who was involved in the charter of that plane. And your honest assessment of who on your current team you would trust with your life, not professionally." "Personally," she nodded once. "Give me an hour." She gave him the names in 40 minutes. 3 pages of handwritten notes, produced with the efficiency of someone whose memory was meticulous and whose handwriting, he noticed, was cramped and fast, the writing of a person who thought faster than she could put it down. She sat across from him at the kitchen table and walked him through each name. The access they'd had, the timeline, what she knew about them. Halfway through the list, she stopped. She set the pen down. "Elliot," she said, quietly, like she was saying it to herself first. "Hargrove," Logan said. She looked up at him. He handled the arrangements after the crash. He was the one who he was the person I leaned on most during that time. He dealt with the investigators, the legal process, the identification. I wasn't functional. For a long time, she stopped. Started again. He's been on my board for 3 years. He has access to everything. He's always been in favor of the March acquisition vote resolution. He told me he supported my position. She pressed her mouth together. He told me so many things. Logan let her have the moment. He didn't fill the silence. How solid is the evidence against him? She asked. Not yet solid enough to arrest him, Logan said honestly. But enough to know the direction, and enough to know that the shareholder meeting in March is connected. He's building towards something, and we're sitting closer to the deadline than I'd like. Aurelia stood up and walked to the window. She stood there looking out at the snow on the grounds. Her hands were at her sides. He could see the tension in her shoulders not falling apart, but holding something at significant cost. I want to see her, she said, today. I know, Logan said. Please. The word came out differently than the rest. Smaller. I understand your caution, and I'm not dismissing it. But I have been living with the wrong thing for 3 years. I need to know it's real. He looked at her back, the set of her shoulders, the effort she was making to hold herself together in front of a stranger when everything she thought she'd lost was suddenly rearranged. Okay, he said, we go together, my route, my terms. She turned from the window. Her eyes were bright but dry. She nodded. He drove. She sat in the passenger seat of Marcus's borrowed car without asking about it, which told him she understood why he wasn't using anything traceable. She sat with her hands in her lap and didn't speak much, and when she did, it was practical directions confirmed, questions about what Ivy had said, what she remembered, what she'd been like. Aurelia stopped. Start again. Is she okay? I mean actually okay, not politely okay. She's tough, Logan said. Tougher than she should have to be. She's been through things no kid should go through. But she's held together well. He paused. She's smart. Very. And she's careful in a way that she learned, not a way that came natural to her. You can see the seams of it, if that makes sense. Like there's a different kid underneath the careful one, waiting to come back out. Aurelia looked out the passenger window. That was her, she said softly. Before, she used to narrate everything. Every thought she had. She'd wake up in the morning and just start talking, before she was even fully awake. About dreams, about what she wanted for breakfast, about the birds outside. She stopped. I used to pretend to be annoyed. I wasn't. Logan didn't say anything. He kept his eyes on the road. What do I when I see her? Aurelia's voice was careful now, precise. What do I do? She doesn't know me. To her, I'm a stranger. Let her lead, Logan said. Don't push. She's learned to be cautious, and you need to let her use that. Don't perform the reunion. Just be a person. Aurelia looked at him sidelong. Has anyone ever told you that you give surprisingly direct advice? Frequently, he said. It doesn't seem to be appreciated. Something close to a smile crossed her face. Small. Gone quickly. They pulled up to Bettit's house from the alley side. Logan went in first, spoke to Marcus briefly, and came back to the car for Aurelia. He walked her to the front room. Ivy was at the kitchen table with the paper maps she'd been drawing for Danny. Danny was explaining to her in detail why the airport needed to be on the north side of Brickopolis and not the south. And Ivy was listening and occasionally pointing out logistical issues with the runway approach angle, which was Logan thought distantly a very Ivy way to engage with a 6-year-old's imaginary city. She looked up when they came in. She looked at Logan first, then at the woman beside him. And something happened to her face. Not recognition, not the clean, cinematic kind, not the kind where the music swells and the child runs forward. It was different from that. It was slower. It was the look of someone who has a memory they don't fully trust, who sees something that matches an image they've been holding for a long time in a part of themselves they couldn't quite access. Her hand went to the pendant through her shirt. Her expression became very still. Aurelia made a sound. Small. Involuntary. She pressed her hand to her mouth. She didn't rush forward. She stood in the doorway and looked at this child, this 7-year-old girl with her dark hair and her careful eyes, and her hand pressed to the pendant at her chest. And Aurelia Vance, who had sat across from Logan and listed names and timelines, with the composure of someone who had learned to function inside grief, was not composed anymore. Her eyes were full. She was trembling slightly. Hi, Aurelia said. Her voice was almost nothing. Ivy stared at her. You smell like wood, she said. And something sweet. The breath Aurelia pulled in was audible. Sandalwood, she said. And vanilla. I've worn it since for a very long time. Ivy slid off her chair. She walked across the room slowly, still not running, still careful, still the version of herself that had learned to be sure before she trusted. She stopped 2 feet from Aurelia and looked up at her. "Are you my mom?" she asked. Aurelia went down to her knees. She didn't care about the floor, didn't care about anything except being at eye level with this child who was looking at her with those dark eyes. Her mother's eyes, both of them exactly the same shape and depth and color. "Yes," Aurelia said. Her voice broke on the word, but she said it clearly. "I am." Ivy looked at her for one more long moment. That last careful moment of a child who has had too many things go wrong and is checking, one more time, that this is real. Then she stepped forward and put her arms around Aurelia's neck. Aurelia held her daughter and shook, silently, with the particular grief of someone who has been wrong about the most important thing they knew, and is only now, finally, being allowed to be wrong about it. Logan stood in the doorway. He looked at his hands. Then he looked at Danny, who had watched all of this with wide eyes, and was now looking up at Logan with the expression of a 6-year-old trying to process something very large. "Is she crying because she's happy?" Danny asked very quietly. "Yeah," Logan said. "That's why." Danny considered this. "Okay," he said, and turned back to his airport diagrams. Marcus came to stand beside Logan. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "Well," Marcus said finally, keeping his voice low. "You found the kid. You found the mother. You've identified the guy behind it." "Yeah," Logan said. "And you've got a man who broke into your house, a 3-year-old conspiracy and a shareholder meeting in March that someone's been building toward since before this kid vanished." "Yeah," Marcus was quiet for a beat. "So what's the play?" Logan watched Aurelia hold her daughter in the middle of Bet's borrowed kitchen, and he thought about 11 days to process a DNA identification, and a retired medical examiner with a sudden private practice, and a corporate attorney connected to a capital management firm with 14% of a company's shares, and a board member who had handled every detail of a grieving mother's tragedy and had done it. Logan now understood with complete deliberate intention. He thought about the intruder in his kitchen, the burner phone, Ivy's photograph on the screen. Hargrove's people were still looking. They hadn't stopped, and they were going to figure out, soon enough, that the picture on that phone wasn't enough anymore. "We go on a fence," Logan said, "before he figures out what he's lost." Marcus looked at him sideways. "With what?" "With everything Aurelia Vance knows about her own company," Logan said. "And everything we know that she doesn't know yet." He straightened up from the doorframe. Across the room, Ivy pulled back from her mother just enough to look at her face. She reached up and touched Aurelia's cheek with one small hand, unself-conscious, tentative, the gesture of a child relearning something they'd stopped believing they'd ever have again. Aurelia caught her hand and held it there. Logan turned away. What came next was going to be hard and complicated and dangerous in ways he hadn't fully mapped yet. But that was the nature of the work. You found the shape of the problem, and you moved toward it, one piece at a time. He had the shape of this one now. And for the first time since Christmas Eve, he felt something click into place in his chest, not relief exactly, not yet, but the solid, reliable certainty of a man who knows which direction he's facing and has decided he is not going to be moved from it. The first thing Aurelia wanted to do was make calls. Logan understood it. She was a woman who had built something enormous from nothing, which meant she was someone who solved problems by mobilizing resources attorneys, security contractors, private investigators, people who owed her favors, and people she could pay enough to manufacture loyalty. It was instinct. It was the only tool she'd ever needed. He stopped her before she reached for her phone. "Not yet," he said. They were in the back room of Bet's house. Marcus was in the front room with the kids. Through the thin wall, Logan could hear Danny explaining the economic structure of Brickopolis to Ivy, who was asking careful questions about the tax base. Aurelia looked at him the way powerful people look at someone who has just told them no, not angry exactly, but registering the obstacle and already calculating around it. "I have resources you don't have access to," she said.
"My legal team alone."
"Your legal team has a relationship with the firm that manages your estate trustee arrangement," Logan said, "which has a financial relationship with Hargrove Meridian. I'm not saying every person in your network is compromised. I'm saying I don't know which ones aren't, And until I do, every call you make is a potential leak. She held his gaze. He didn't look away. You've been running your company for 8 years, he said. You know what a compromised information channel looks like. You know what happens when you move before you've secured the perimeter. Something shifted in her expression. The calculation changed. Who do you trust completely? He said. Not professionally. Not because they're paid well. Who do you trust the way you'd trust someone with your daughter? Quiet for a moment. Then my CFO, Renata Solis. She's been with me since the beginning, before the IPO. She knows where all the bodies are buried in that company, metaphorically speaking. A pause. And my outside counsel, Vera Kim. She does my personal legal work, separate from the corporate team. She's never had a relationship with Hargrove or his people. Can you reach them in a way Hargrove wouldn't be monitoring? Personal phone, not company devices. Renata? Yes. Vera has a direct line that doesn't route through my assistant. Then those are your 2 calls, Logan said. Nobody else until we know more. Aurelia sat down at Betta's kitchen table. She put her hands flat on the surface in front of her, a deliberate gesture, the kind you made when you were physically managing your own impatience. Tell me what you need from them. From Renata, everything unusual in the company's financial reporting over the last 3 years. Any transactions, any account movements, anything she's noticed but couldn't explain. The kinds of things that look like noise but don't feel like it. He sat across from her. From Vera, I need to know the exact legal mechanism that would allow someone to challenge your position as CEO and what the timeline looks like relative to March. Patricia Osi gave me the outline, but your attorney will have the specific language of your corporate documents. Aurelia was already reaching for her phone. Personal device, he said. She stopped, reached instead into her jacket pocket and pulled out a second phone older, a model 2 generations back. Caught his expression. I've kept a separate line for 3 years, she said. Since the crash. I don't entirely know why I never got rid of it. Old paranoia, I suppose. Not paranoia, Logan said. Instinct. She made the calls in the back room while Logan went to check on the kids. Marcus met him in the hallway with a look that said things were stable, but he had thoughts. She's going to want to run this herself, Marcus said. Quietly. I know. You going to let her? Logan looked through the doorway at Ivy, who was sitting beside Danny on the couch now, helping him draw what appeared to be a very detailed map of Brickopolis's transit system. Something about the way Ivy sat had changed since the morning, a slight loosening in the shoulders, a fraction less of that constant vigilance, like a muscle that had been held tight for so long it had forgotten it was supposed to relax. She can run whatever she wants to run, Logan said, as long as nobody moves Ivy without me knowing about it. Marcus nodded. Fair. And I need you to reach out to whoever you know in federal law enforcement. Not local. Federal. Someone you trust who isn't connected to any of the corporate threads in this. Marcus looked at him. You're thinking about going to the FBI. I'm thinking about having that option ready when we have enough evidence to make it stick, Logan said. Right now we have a theory with good support. We need documentation. We need something that doesn't require a jury to take our word for it. And how are you planning to get that? Logan was quiet for a moment, working through it. Hargrove made one mistake. He kept someone alive who knew what he'd done. Darlene Marsh spent 3 years keeping that child safe, which means Darlene Marsh knew enough to be dangerous to him. People who know dangerous things tend to write them down. Apartment was cleaned out. The apartment was, Lozen said. But people who spend 3 years hiding a child alone, in isolation, without knowing if anyone's ever coming to help them, they don't put everything in one place. Aurelia came out of the back room 40 minutes later. She looked different than when she'd gone in. Something had settled in her face, a kind of grimness that wasn't hopeless, but was clear-eyed about what she was looking at. Renata found something 8 months ago, she said. She sat down and spread her hands on the table again, and Logan had already started to recognize this, as her thinking posture the physical anchor while her mind moved fast. A series of internal transfers that ran through our compliance department. Small amounts individually, but she tracked them over time and they aggregate to something significant. She flagged them internally and was told they were part of a vendor audit. She accepted that explanation at the time, but she kept her notes. Who told her it was a vendor audit? Our chief compliance officer, Aurelia said. A man named Soren Price. He's been in the role for 3 years. 3 years again. Logan wrote the name down. Is he connected to Hargrove? I didn't know he was. But Renata just told me that Price came to us through a board recommendation. She paused. Hargrove's recommendation. The room was quiet for a moment. Vera, Aurelia continued, tells me that the specific challenge Hargrove would use in a board vote is a Section 14 governance provision in our incorporation documents. Under that provision, if 3 of the 7 board members file a joint petition citing operational mismanagement, they can call an emergency shareholders meeting outside the regular schedule. That meeting, a simple majority vote can remove the CEO. She met Logan's eyes. Hargrove controls 2 board votes, directly his own, and a proxy from another institutional holder he has a side agreement with. He needs 1 more. And according to Vera's read of recent board communications, there's a 3rd member who has been quietly signaling receptiveness to a leadership discussion. Who? A woman named Patricia Dern. She's been on the board 4 years. She and Hargrove have had dinner twice in the last 6 months, which I knew about and didn't think was significant at the time. Flicker of something crossed her face, not quite anger, but the particular expression of someone who is retroactively understanding a pattern they missed. I trusted the wrong reading of normal. Most people would have, Logan said. Most people aren't running a company with this kind of exposure. She said it flatly, without self-pity. Just an accounting. He let that sit for a moment. Then he said, the transfers Renata found, what account did they originate from? Compliance Reserve Fund. Technically used for regulatory settlements and audit costs. She pulled out her phone and showed him a number. Over 22 months. He looked at the number. It was significant. Not enough to be catastrophic to a company of advanced technology's size, but significant enough to matter if it was going somewhere specific. If that money was flowing to Hargrove Meridian or an affiliated entity, Logan said, that's wire fraud. Potentially RICO if we can connect it to the kidnapping. Can we connect it? That's what I'm going to find out. He went back to the bus station neighborhood alone the following morning. Marcus had offered to come. Logan had said no, partly because he needed Marcus with the kids, and partly because 2 people looking for a dead woman's hidden files in a cleared-out apartment building was twice the profile of 1 person doing it. And profile was the one thing he couldn't afford right now. The building was a 6-story walk-up that smelled like old radiator heat and the accumulated residue of a lot of people living in very close quarters for a very long time. The super was a heavy-set man named Earl, who wore his skepticism on his face like a second skin, and who had clearly dealt with enough situations in this building to be unimpressed by most of what walked through his door. Logan told him he was looking into the disappearance of a woman named Darlene Marsh, that he wasn't law enforcement, but that law enforcement would likely be following up, and that he'd appreciate a few minutes in the unit. He put $200 on the counter without making a production of it. Earl looked at the money, looked at Logan, took the money and led him upstairs. The unit was on the 4th floor. It had been cleaned out professionally, as Marcus had said, surfaces wiped, drawers emptied, the kind of departure that removed person along with possessions. But Logan had done enough search operations to know that professional thoroughness had limits, especially when time was a factor. Cleared the obvious places and moved fast. You didn't have time for the non-obvious ones. He spent 40 minutes in the apartment. He checked the backs of cabinet shelves. He checked the space behind the radiator, which had been painted over so many times the paint was thick as cardboard. He checked the underside of the bathroom vanity. He checked the closet floor, pressing each board individually for give. Found it in the kitchen. A section of baseboard behind the refrigerator that didn't match the adjacent section's slightly newer paint, slightly different angle. He pulled the refrigerator out from the wall, which took more effort than he had good shoulder clearance for, and removed the baseboard section with a flathead from his jacket pocket. Behind it was a waterproof document bag, the kind used for camping. Sealed. Inside was a USB drive, a folded sheaf of papers, and a single photograph. The photograph was of Ivy. Maybe age 4, sitting in a garden with a woman. Logan didn't recognize a woman in her 40s. Dark hair, unremarkable face, holding Ivy on her lap with the careful, slightly self-conscious posture of someone who was not the child's mother, but was trying to be adequate to the job. He looked at the USB drive. He looked at the papers, which were handwritten in a small, dense script. put everything back in the document bag and zipped it shut. He replaced the baseboard, pushed the refrigerator back. He was out of the building in 6 minutes. Patricia Osei read the handwritten documents that evening at Aurelia's farmhouse, which was where they had consolidated. Aurelia had arranged private security through a firm entirely separate from her corporate team. 3-person crew recommended by Vera Kim, who had no existing relationship to any of Hargrove's network. Logan had checked them himself before agreeing to the move. Marcus sat in the corner during the reading. Ivy and Danny were in the upstairs room, which Aurelia had converted into a children's space. With a speed that suggested she'd had the materials ready long before any of this, some part of her had been preparing for a child to return to this house even while she was telling herself it was impossible. Patricia read for 45 minutes. When she finished, she set the pages down and looked at Logan. "This woman," she said, "Darlene Marsh. She spent 3 years documenting everything. Names, dates, transaction references, account numbers. She has the original charter information for the plane. She has internal communications. How she got them, I don't know, but she has them. She names Price as the operational contact. She names 2 other men I don't recognize, but the account numbers she provides for the fund transfers should be traceable." She paused. "She also has a sworn statement, notarized, executed approximately 2 months ago by a notary in this city. It states that she received payment from an entity connected to Hargrove Meridian Capital to take custody of a child and keep her hidden indefinitely, and that she chose to create this record because she believed she was going to be killed when the situation resolved." The room was very quiet. "She was right," Marcus said. "Yes," Patricia said. "She was right." She looked at the papers. "This woman knew she was going to be killed, and she spent the last months she had making sure there was something left behind." Logan thought about Darlene Marsh, whoever she had really been. A woman who had taken a child and hidden her on someone's orders, who had somewhere along the way decided the child mattered more than the orders, who had spent 3 years in an apartment near a bus station feeding a little girl and telling her it wasn't safe to go anywhere, and who had died without anyone knowing she'd done any of it. He didn't know what to make of that. He sat with it for a moment and then set it aside, because there wasn't time to sit with it properly, and it deserved better than a quick reckoning. "The USB drive," he said to Patricia. "I need someone who can forensically verify its contents without triggering any alert that would be visible to Hargrove's people." "I know someone," Patricia said. "A digital forensic specialist I've used on 2 cases. Completely independent. How fast? If I call tonight, tomorrow afternoon?" Logan nodded. "Call tonight." The USB drive contained emails. Internal emails pulled from the Vance Technologies executive server at a period approximately 3.5 years ago. They had been extracted and copied by someone with server access, and when Patricia's forensic specialist delivered the analysis the following afternoon, his report identified the metadata signature of the extraction as originating from the CCO's administrative account. Soren Price. Either Darlene Marsh had had help from inside Price's office, or someone very close to him had been quietly building a case of their own. Either way, the emails existed, and they were specific. They included 3 exchanges between Price and an external address that routed through 2 proxy servers before terminating at a domain registered to a shell company, and the content of those exchanges included references to the aircraft. Arrangement to confirmation of the identification timeline, and to a payment schedule tied to specific dates that aligned exactly with the financial transfers Renata had flagged. One email, dated 4 days before the plane went down, read simply, "Confirm the alternate arrangement for the passenger manifest is in place. The child cannot appear in any official record after the date. Hargrove needs clean closure." Logan read that sentence twice. "Clean closure," Aurelia said. She was standing behind him, reading over his shoulder. Her voice was very controlled, very flat, the kind of flat that wasn't calm but was what you had left after calm wasn't an option. "He needed you to believe she was gone," Logan said. "As long as you believed it, the succession gap existed. And he's had 3 years to position himself around that gap." Aurelia straightened up. She walked to the window and stood there. Logan watched her back, the tension in her spine, the deliberate quality of her breathing. She was doing the same thing he'd seen her do that first day at the farmhouse. Holding something massive without putting it down. choosing moment to function. Elliot sat with me, she said. The memorial. He held my hand when they gave me the final identification report. He said she stopped. He said, "At least you know. At least there's no uncertainty." She turned from the window. He was the one who walked me through signing the revised estate paperwork 6 months later. He said the attorneys recommended updating the succession language given the change in circumstances. I signed it. What did you sign? I didn't understand the full implications at the time. I was not reading things carefully during that period. I signed what he put in front of me. She looked at him steadily. Vera reviewed it today. The revised language significantly strengthened the trustee mechanism and removed language that would have given me unilateral authority in a board crisis. I made myself more vulnerable and didn't know it. Logan didn't say anything for a moment. We can reverse it. Can we? If it was executed under conditions of fraud, if you signed documents that were materially misrepresented to you by a party who had a direct financial interest in the outcome, yes. Vera would know the mechanism better than I do, but fraud vitiates consent. That's not a complicated argument. Something came into Aurelia's expression. It wasn't quite hope she'd been through too much in too short a time for hope to arrive cleanly, but it was the thing adjacent to it. The recognition that the shape of the trap wasn't as permanent as it had seemed. I want to be the one to bring this to the FBI, she said. Not through an intermediary. I want to walk in myself with documentation. That's exactly right, Logan said. You should. Marcus has a federal contact organized crime and financial crimes unit. Clean. No corporate connections. I'd recommend you have Vera with you. When? He looked at Patricia, who looked at her forensic specialist's timeline, and said, "We need 48 hours to fully catalog and authenticate everything on that drive. Authenticated copies, only you don't want originals leaving your control until you hand them to a federal agent." 48 hours, Aurelia said. She nodded. Those 48 hours were the ones that almost came apart. It happened on the second evening. Logan had been running on 4 hours of sleep over 2 days, and he knew it, and knowing it didn't fix it. So he managed it the way he'd managed fatigue in the field, by narrowing his focus to the immediate, by not letting the tiredness become permission for sloppiness. He was on the back porch of the farmhouse at 9 p.m. when he noticed the vehicle. It was parked on the access road that ran along the property's eastern edge, a service road, mostly used by the groundskeeping crew, not visible from the main gate. The vehicle was dark-colored, engine off, no lights. It had been there for 17 minutes. He knew because he had done a perimeter check at exactly the right time and had noted it, cataloged it, filed it under watch. 20 minutes, a second vehicle joined it. He went inside and found Marcus. 2 vehicles, he said, keeping his voice down. East Access Road. No lights, no movement. 20 minutes on the first one. Marcus was already standing. Hargrove? Someone tipped. Somebody in the last 48 hours moved in a way that was visible. He ran through the contact list in his head. Patricia, the forensic specialist, Renata Vera, the new security team. Either someone on our information chain or someone running surveillance on Aurelia's communications that we didn't account for. What's your read? They're not there to watch, Logan said. If you're there to watch, you don't send 2 vehicles. They had 60 seconds of conversation. That was all they needed. They'd worked together in enough situations where 60 seconds was all there was. Logan went upstairs. Ivy was in the children's room with Danny. They'd been watching a movie on a tablet, and Ivy had fallen half asleep against Danny's shoulder in the way children do when they're finally genuinely safe enough to let their guard fully down for the first time in a long time. Danny was still watching, very still, apparently not wanting to wake her. Logan crouched down beside them. "Danny," he said. "Quiet. Hey, look at me." Danny looked at him. His eyes were serious immediately. He'd learned that voice too. "I need you to do something for me, and I need you to do it without making noise." "Okay?" "Okay," Danny said. Steady. 6 years old and steady, which made Logan's chest do something complicated. "I need you to wake Ivy up very gently, and then I need both of you to stay completely quiet and come with me downstairs. Don't turn off the tablet. Don't get your things. Just come." Danny shook Ivy's shoulder carefully. She was awake in an instant, not gradually, not with the bleary confusion of a child pulled from deep sleep, but fully alert in 1 second, eyes open and reading the room. That fast transition told its own story about what her 3 years had been like. She looked at Logan. "What's happening?" "We need to move." Quietly. She nodded and stood up. He brought them to the ground floor and to the back of the house, where the kitchen opened to an interior hallway. Aurelia was already there. Marcus had gotten to her first. She looked at Ivy, and then at Logan, and her jaw set in the particular way it did when she was frightened, and converting it directly into function. "There's a safe room," she said, "behind the utility room. Previous owner had it installed." "Show me," Logan said. She showed him. The door was steel reinforced behind a wooden panel that looked like a utility closet. Inside was a space about the size of a large bathroom, with a phone line, a first aid kit, and a water supply. Solid construction. He looked at the door mechanism. "Adequate. You three go in," he said. Aurelia looked at him. "What are you going to do?" "Marcus and I are going to handle what's outside." He said it straightforwardly, the way you said things when there wasn't room for argument. "If I come back and knock 3 times, pause, then 2 times that's me. Don't open for anything else. Logan Aurelia." He said her name and she stopped. "Your daughter just got you back. Don't make her watch something happen to you because you argued with me for 30 seconds. Landed. He saw it land. She went in, Ivy went in. Danny went in, and at the threshold he turned back and looked up at Logan with those serious eyes. "Are you going to be okay, Dad?" he said. The word hit Logan somewhere unguarded. He had a half-second to absorb it and let it go, because there wasn't time for it. "Yeah," he said. "I'll be right back." He closed the door and went to find Marcus. What happened over the next 22 minutes was not clean. Logan would not have described it as clean later. And Marcus, who had been in genuine firefights on 2 continents and used the word clean with some precision, would not have either. 2 men came over the east fence at the point furthest from the main security cameras, the blind spot, which someone had mapped in advance. They moved like professionals, deliberate, coordinated, clearly briefed on the property layout. What they hadn't been briefed on was Logan. He came in from the north angle while Marcus came from the south, which meant the 2 men were bracketed before either of them had cleared the tree line that ran along the property's interior edge. Logan's advantage was that he didn't want to engage in the open, not because he was worried about himself, but because he carried, and the situation was already unstable. He wanted containment, not confrontation. He got one and a version of the other. The first man he took to the ground quickly, efficiently, with the particular muscle memory of someone who had done this enough times to do it without thinking, which was the only way to do it well. Zip ties from his jacket pocket. The man swore, and Logan told him to be quiet, and the man reading the room correctly was quiet. The second man was faster and more experienced, and it wasn't clean. It involved Logan's shoulder taking a hit that reawakened the metal plate in a way that would make the next several days unpleasant. And it involved a brief, ugly stretch of the kind of close contact work that looks nothing like movies and feels nothing like training, because training doesn't include adrenaline and anger and the particular cold clarity that descends when you understand that someone came to a house with a 7-year-old child in it and meant to do harm. Marcus secured the second man. They found the phones on both of them. Burner units, freshly wiped, except for one which had a text thread with a number. Marcus ran immediately and traced to a communications relay service with known connections to 2 private investigators on Hargrove Meridian Capital's contractor list. It was a thread. Not the whole rope, but a thread that would hold. Logan's hand was bleeding from where it had caught the fence bracket. He wrapped it with a strip from the first aid kit he kept in his jacket and went back to the house and knocked 3 times, paused, then twice. The door opened. Ivy came out first. She looked at his hand and then at his face. "You're bleeding," she said. "It's not bad," he said. She looked at it with the skeptical expression of someone who has decided she is not going to simply get reassurances anymore. Then she went to the kitchen and came back with a dish towel and wrapped it more securely than he had, with a knot that was neater than a 7-year-old should reasonably have been able to tie. "Darlene taught me," she said, without looking up from the knot. She said it was important to know how to take care of things. Logan looked down at the top of her head. She was right, he said. Aurelia was on the phone with Vera within 3 minutes. The men outside were handed to local law enforcement with documentation from Marcus's federal contact already in process, a chain of custody that had been set up carefully enough that it would hold. The connection between them and Hargrove's contractor list was in Patricia's hands before midnight. At 2 in the morning, Aurelia sat down at the kitchen table and looked across at Logan with the expressions of someone who has been running on emergency reserves for days and has just discovered the reserves have a floor. "It's enough, isn't it?" she said. "What we have." "It's close," Logan said honestly. "The contractor connection, the email chain, Darlene's sworn statement, the financial transfers, and 2 men who just got arrested on your property and are going to have a strong incentive to cooperate.
Yeah.
I think it's enough. Vera wants to go to the FBI tomorrow morning." "Think she's right." Aurelia nodded slowly. She looked at the table for a moment. Then she looked up at him. "You've been doing this for 4 days without you don't work for me. You have no reason to have kept going. You found a child and any reasonable person would have called the authorities and stepped back." "Sure," Logan said. "Why didn't you?" He thought about how to answer that. He didn't have a polished one, and he'd stopped trusting polished answers a long time ago. "Because she asked me not to send her back," he said. "And because when I looked at her, I couldn't figure out where back was going to be that was safe. And then it stopped being about figuring out the right authority to hand her to and started being about actually solving the problem." He paused. "I'm better at solving the problem." Aurelia looked at him for a moment. Something moved through her expression, complicated, several things at once. "You should know," she said carefully, "that I intend to compensate you. Significantly." "Whatever." "No," he said. She stopped. "I don't want that," he said. "I'm not telling you that to be noble about it. I just know. That's not what this was." She studied him. "What was it then?" He didn't have a clean answer to that either. So he just shook his head and stood up and said he was going to check on the kids. Upstairs, Danny was asleep in the way of a child who had held himself together all day and had finally absolutely run out. Ivy was awake, lying on her side in the other bed, looking at the ceiling. Logan came in and sat on the edge of the small chair near the window. "Is it over?" Ivy asked. "Getting there," he said. "The hard part's almost done." She was quiet for a moment. "Are you going to leave? After it's done?" He looked at her. "What do you mean? I mean..." She turned her head to look at him. "You're not part of this. You found me and you figured everything out, and you helped my mom. But you have your own life. You and Danny." She said it carefully, not accusingly, like she was just trying to understand the logistics. "I know you don't have to stay." Logan didn't answer right away. He looked at this 7-year-old girl who had spent years learning not to count on people staying, learning to do the accounting early, so it didn't hurt as much when the math came out the way she expected. "I'm not planning on going anywhere," he said. She looked at him a bit longer. "Measuring," in the way she measured everything. "Okay," she finally said, and turned back to look at the ceiling. It wasn't a huge moment. She didn't cry, didn't reach out, didn't do anything dramatic. She just said okay and kept looking at the ceiling, and Logan sat in the chair by the window until her breathing evened out into sleep. He sat there a while after that too, listening to the house and thinking about nothing in particular, which was the closest he got to rest anymore. The next morning, Aurelia Vance walked into the federal building with Vera Kim and a USB drive and 40 pages of authenticated documentation and a notarized sworn statement from a woman who had died protecting a child. And she sat down across from 2 agents in an interview room and said, clearly and without preamble, "I need to tell you what was done to my daughter, and I need to tell you who did it. And I need you to understand that I have been building toward this conversation for 3 years without knowing it." Agents listened. And Elliot Hargrove, who was at that moment sitting in a board strategy meeting 2 miles away, finalizing the language of the no-confidence petition with Patricia Dern and the paperwork of a man who believed he had already won, did not yet know that the child he had arranged to disappear was sitting in a warm farmhouse with her mother, or that everything he had spent 3 years constructing was already in the hands of people who were very good at taking things apart. He would know by afternoon. Elliot Hargrove was arrested on a Thursday afternoon. Logan heard about it from Marcus, who heard it from the federal contact, who called at 4 7 p.m. to confirm that the arrest had been executed at Hargrove's office building, with sufficient documentation to make bail a complicated proposition. Soren Price was taken the same afternoon from his home in the suburbs, where he had apparently been in the process of shredding documents, a detail the arresting agents noted with the particular dry satisfaction of people who have seen that particular mistake too many times to find it surprising anymore. Tricia Dern, the board member who had been quietly positioning herself for the post-Aurelia landscape, received a federal subpoena at dinner and retained a criminal defense attorney before the dessert course. The two men from the farmhouse had already cooperated. Whatever Hargrove had offered them in terms of compensation had not been sufficient to make them absorb a federal conspiracy charge without talking, which was the pragmatic reality of people who were loyal to money rather than to anything that actually held. Logan was in his kitchen when Marcus called. He was making dinner pasta, the simple kind, nothing that required attention he didn't have. Danny was at the table doing homework with the intense, slightly performative concentration of a child who wanted credit for working hard and was also very much hoping the adult would notice how hard he was working. "It's done," Marcus said. Logan turned the heat down on the stove. "The charges? Wire fraud, conspiracy, kidnapping across state lines, and the federal agents are still pulling on threads from the financial transfers. Could get wider. Price is already talking, which means Hargrove's team is going to be very busy and very expensive for a very long time. Ivy's identification? In process. Vera Kim filed the legal petition to restore her civil record this morning. The attorney says it's a formality at this point. The biological confirmation is solid, and the original death declaration was fraudulent. They expect a judge to sign off within 10 days. Logan said, "Okay," he said it quietly. "The way you said something you'd been waiting to hear, but had kept yourself from counting on." "You going to be all right?" Marcus asked. "Yeah," Logan said. Logan. A pause. "I mean with all of it, not just the legal end." Logan leaned against the counter. He thought about how to answer that honestly. "I don't know yet," he said. "Ask me in a few months." Marcus made a sound that was partly acknowledgement and partly something warmer than he would have called it. "Good work, man," he said. "The whole thing. Darlene Marsh did the work," Logan said. "I just found her filing system." After he hung up, he stood at the stove for a moment. Danny had stopped pretending to do homework and was watching him with those serious eyes. "Good news," Danny said. "Yeah," Logan said. "Good news." Danny nodded, apparently satisfied, and went back to his worksheet. Logan stirred the pasta and thought about a woman who had spent 3 years in an apartment near a bus station, alone with someone else's child, writing everything down in small, dense handwriting, getting a notary to witness a sworn statement 2 months before she died. He thought about the particular kind of courage that didn't announce itself, that just stayed in the room and did the work, because someone had to. He thought about what it cost to do that kind of thing, and what you got in return for it, which was nothing, except maybe the knowledge that you'd done it. He thought he ought to find a way to honor that. He didn't know what the form of it would be, but he thought it mattered, and he filed it in the place where he kept the things that mattered, and he went back to making dinner. 10 days later, a judge signed the restoration order for Ivy Vance. The name on the document was Ivy Celeste Vance. The middle name had been Aurelia's, given at birth and now returned, officially, to a girl who had spent 3 years existing in a legal gray space that nobody outside of a narrow conspiracy had known about. Vera Kim called Aurelia when the order came through, and Aurelia was in a meeting with her restructured board, 2 new independent members replacing Hargrove and Dern, selected this time with the kind of scrutiny that came from having been badly wrong before, and she excused herself and stood in the hallway of her company's building and cried for the first time since the farmhouse, privately, quickly, and then went back into the meeting. She told Logan about it that evening. At his house, over the particular chaotic dinner that had become a recurring event in the weeks since the arrests, Aurelia and Ivy driving over 2 or 3 evenings a week, or Logan and Danny driving the other direction, a rhythm that had established itself without anyone formally deciding it should. "I didn't plan to cry," Aurelia said. She was at Logan's kitchen table, which was covered in Danny's homework and a half-finished drawing Ivy had been working on. It came out. "That's generally how it works," Logan said. "I know." She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. I've cried more in the last month than in the previous 3 years combined. Which is uncomfortable. Probably overdue. She looked at him sideways. Very direct. You've mentioned that. It's not a criticism, she said. It's an observation. He put a plate of food in front of her because she had the particular distracted quality of someone who had been in meetings all day and had forgotten to eat, which he'd started to recognize as one of her patterns. She looked at it and then started eating, without comment, which he took as its own kind of acknowledgement. From the living room came the sounds of Ivy and Danny engaged in what appeared to be an involved disagreement about the rules of a game they had invented, which changed every time they played it in ways that seemed designed to favor whoever invented the newest version. She needs more time, Aurelia said. Not a complaint, just an accounting. She sees the therapist twice a week, and it's helping. But there are still nights where she wakes up and doesn't know where she is. And she still does this thing where she eats quickly, like she's not sure the food will still be there. She set her fork down for a moment. That one is hard to watch. It'll get better, Logan said. Kind of thing is slow, but it gets better. How do you know? He thought about it. Because I've seen people come back from worse. And because she's already better than she was 5 weeks ago. You can see it if you look at the specifics. Aurelia looked at him. What specifics? She argues with Danny now, Logan said. When they first met, she was very careful not to disagree with him about anything. She deferred. She took up as little space as possible. He glanced toward the living room, from which the disagreement about the game rules had reached a new level of rhetorical complexity. She's not doing that anymore. Aurelia listened to the argument in the next room. Ivy was making a very detailed case for why the rules she'd introduced in round 3 were valid on procedural grounds. Danny was countering on the grounds that he hadn't agreed to round 3 rules before round 3 started. You're right, Aurelia said softly. She's going to be okay, Logan said. She's tough in the right ways. She gets that from somewhere, Aurelia said, and then seemed to catch herself, like she'd been about to say something, and thought better of landing it too directly. Logan understood what she meant. He let it sit and didn't make it awkward. The restructuring of Vance Technologies took the better part of 3 months. Renata Solis, the CFO, who had flagged the suspicious transfers 8 months earlier and been given a wrong answer and accepted it, threw herself into the forensic accounting work with the energy of someone who had been given a chance to fix something she'd let slide, even if she'd had no good reason to believe she was letting anything slide. She identified the full scope of the fund diversions larger than anyone had initially estimated, drawn from 5 different internal accounts over a longer period than the 22 months Renata had originally traced. Price had been thorough and patient. The money had moved in small enough amounts to stay below most automated alert thresholds, routed through a vendor account that genuinely existed and genuinely performed some services, which gave the transfers a surface plausibility that held until you looked at the ratio of payments to deliverables. 3 additional employees were identified as either willing participants or people who had been paid to not ask questions. 2 of them cooperated with investigators. 1 didn't, and was left to the consequences of that choice. The shareholder meeting in March was nothing like what Hargrove had planned. Aurelia stood at the front of the room and addressed the assembled institutional holders and their representatives with the particular directness of someone who had recently been through something that burned away her tolerance for indirect language. She explained what had happened. She explained what she had done to address it. She laid out the structural changes she was implementing in governance and compliance oversight, and she answered every question she was asked without evasion, including the uncomfortable ones about how the vulnerabilities had developed on her watch. She didn't perform contrition. She didn't perform confidence either. She just stood there and told the truth about what had happened and what she was doing about it, and she let the room decide what to do with that. The resolution passed. She remained CEO. Renata told her afterward that she thought the honesty had been the deciding factor. Aurelia said she hadn't done it as a strategy. Renata said she knew, and that was probably why it worked. Logan went back to work in the second week of January. His crew had managed the holiday shutdown without incident and came back in reasonable spirits, which was about as much as you could ask from a construction crew in January. The job site was a commercial renovation on the west side, a former warehouse being converted into mixed-use retail and office space. The kind of project that would take 8 months and involve a significant amount of problem-solving that couldn't be anticipated from the plans. He was good at that. The unanticipated problems. The ones that required you to look at what was actually in front of you rather than what was supposed to be there. His shoulder was bad for the first 2 weeks back. The hit he'd taken at the farmhouse had done something to the tissue around the plate that wasn't catastrophic, but wasn't comfortable, and cold weather made it worse. He managed it the way he'd always managed it, with anti-inflammatories and the stubborn refusal to adjust his work pace in ways his crew might notice and worry about. His foreman, a 28-year-old named Chris, had the build of someone who'd played college football and the organizational instincts of someone twice his age, noticed anyway, because Chris was good at his job. "You need to see someone about that shoulder," Chris said one morning. "I'm fine," Logan said. "You said that last week." Still true. Chris looked at him. "I'll cover the afternoon if you go to the clinic." "I'm not going to the clinic in the middle of a pour." Logan, Chris. They looked at each other for a moment. Chris had learned, in 2 years of working for Logan, that there were exactly 3 categories of argument. Things Logan would consider, things Logan would hear and dismiss, and things Logan had already decided, in which case the conversation was decorative. The shoulder was in the 3rd category. "Fine," Chris said. "But if you drop something on your crew because your arm gives out, I'm telling everyone it was my idea to warn you." "That's fair," Logan said. He went to the clinic on Saturday. The doctor told him the inflammation was manageable and recommended a course of physical therapy he had already been recommended twice before and not completed. He scheduled the appointments this time, partly because his shoulder genuinely hurt, partly because Danny had started asking about it, and Danny's questions had a way of landing that made avoidance feel like the less sustainable option. Spring arrived in the uneven, hesitant way it did in this part of the country, warm for 3 days, cold for 4, a week of rain that felt personal, and then one morning in late March when Logan walked outside to get his truck and the air was different. Not warm exactly, but not fighting him anymore. Just air. Ivy had started school in February, enrolled in the 2nd grade at a private school 20 minutes from Aurelia's city residence. The first week had been hard. She'd come home quiet each day, which Aurelia had worried about, and Logan had said to give it time. The 2nd week she'd come home talking about a girl named Fiona, who had opinions about everything and was therefore interesting. The 3rd week she was doing Fiona's math homework in exchange for Fiona's help with a class art project, which Aurelia had felt conflicted about on pedagogical grounds, and Logan had said was an extremely efficient allocation of respective strengths. "Can't just let her do other children's homework," Aurelia said. They were in her car in the school parking lot, waiting for the afternoon bell. "I'm not saying encourage it," Logan said. "I'm saying it shows she's reading the social dynamics and finding her place in them. That's actually good. It's also ethically questionable. She's 7. 7-year-olds develop ethical frameworks." Logan looked at her. "Have you been reading parenting books?" "Several," she said, without any embarrassment. "I missed 4 years. I have reading to do." He didn't have a comeback for that. It was the most straightforward thing she'd said to him in weeks, and it sat in the car between them with a weight that wasn't uncomfortable exactly, but that required a moment. The bell rang. Kids started coming through the main doors. Ivy came out with Fiona, who was taller than Ivy and talking rapidly about something that required extensive hand gestures. Ivy was listening with the focused attention she gave, things she found genuinely interesting. When she saw the car, she said something to Fiona, who waved the kind of wave that suggested their conversation had not concluded but had been temporarily suspended, and then Ivy walked to the car and got in the back seat and immediately said, "Fiona thinks I should join the science club, but it meets on Thursdays, and that's when I see Dr. Ellison. Dr. Ellison can probably move your Thursday slot," Aurelia said. Ivy considered this. "Okay, then can Danny come to the science club too? I think he'd like it." "Danny doesn't go to this school," Logan said. "I know, but maybe he could visit. Fiona says they sometimes have visitors." Logan looked in the rearview mirror at his daughter at Ivy. He corrected himself. Still doing that, still catching the word before it arrived, and she was looking back at him with those dark eyes, waiting for an answer. "I'll look into it," he said. She nodded, apparently satisfied, and looked out the window. And then, because she was 7 and the moment had passed, she started telling Aurelia about a disagreement she'd had with her science teacher about the classification of Pluto, which she felt had been resolved incorrectly in 2006 and continued to be resolved incorrectly. And Aurelia, who had a master's degree in computational engineering and genuine opinions about astronomical classification, engaged with this immediately and seriously. Logan drove and listened to them argue about Pluto, and something in his chest sat quietly, which was the best he could usually say for things. The conversation happened on a Wednesday evening in late November, almost a full year after Christmas Eve. They had fallen into a pattern by then that nobody had formally described, but that had become as reliable as any structure. 3 or 4 evenings a week, some version of the 4 of them was together at Logan's house or Aurelia's, dinner or homework, or the particular comfortable chaos of 2 children who had decided they were effectively siblings and treated each other accordingly, which meant they fought sometimes and defended each other immediately afterward. That evening it was Logan's house. He'd made a real dinner for once, not pasta, but an actual roast chicken with vegetables, because Danny had decided he wanted to learn to cook, and Logan had decided this was a reasonable thing to teach him, which meant Sunday afternoons were now cooking lessons that produced variable results and always left the kitchen requiring significant attention. Chicken had turned out well. Danny had wanted full credit. Ivy had pointed out that Logan had done the hard parts, which Danny disputed on the grounds that he had done the seasoning entirely himself. Aurelia had settled it by saying the seasoning was in fact the most important part, which was not accurate but was kind, and Danny had accepted this resolution with dignity. After dinner, Aurelia was at the table, helping Ivy with a reading assignment, and Logan was washing up, and Danny was somewhere between helping and creating additional mess, which was his general approach to kitchen cleanup. Logan heard the footsteps behind him slow. He turned around. Ivy was standing in the kitchen doorway. She'd left the table without him noticing. She was in her socks and the sweater she'd picked out herself at the store 2 weeks ago, navy blue, slightly too big for her in the way she liked things, a style preference that had emerged once she had the option of preferences. She had the pendant on, as always, outside her sweater tonight. She was looking at him with an expression he'd learned to recognize over the past year. The one she got when she was working up to something she'd been thinking about for a while. He dried his hands on the dish towel and turned to face her. "What's up?" She came into the kitchen and stood a few feet from him, looking at him directly in that way. She'd always had not performing confidence, just maintaining eye contact because she'd decided this mattered enough to look at straight. "You're the one who found me," she said. "Yeah," he said. "You didn't have to," she said. "You could have kept driving." "Could have. But you stopped." She seemed to be doing something careful with the words, testing the weight of them before she committed. "And then you stayed. Even when it got you kept staying." He nodded. He didn't say anything because he could tell she wasn't done. "Danny calls you Dad," she said. "He does." She looked at him. "Is that because you're his dad?" "You actually are. But you're the one who stayed with me too. You did all of it." She stopped. Started again. "I know you're not. I know it's different. My mom is my mom, and that's..." She pressed her lips together. "But you're also the one who found me, and you're the one who made sure." And I was thinking. She stopped again. "Ivy," he said. "Just say it." She looked up at him. "If you're the one who saved me, can I still call you Dad?" Question hung in the kitchen, simple and enormous. Logan stood there for a moment. He was aware of the sounds of the house around him, Aurelia's voice from the other room. Reading a sentence out loud, the scratch of pencil on paper, Danny's feet on the floor above. All of it ordinary. All of it the thing he hadn't known he was missing until it was already there. He thought about a 7-year-old in an alley on Christmas Eve with a broken zipper and no bag and an expensive pendant she didn't fully understand, eating a turkey sandwich in 45 seconds and then asking him not to send her back. He thought about what that question had cost her to ask. Then and now. He crouched down so he was at her level. The shoulder complained. He ignored it. "You can call me whatever feels right," he said. "Whatever feels true. That's the only rule." She looked at him for one more long moment. The last of it, the final, small reserve of caution that a child builds up when they've been uncertain, too many times, the last thin layer of wait and see. "Dad," she said. It was barely a word, more like a test of the sound. But she said it, and it landed, and neither of them looked away. He put his arms around her, and she let him, which she didn't always, which made the times she did matter in a way he couldn't have explained clearly. She was small and solid, and she smelled like the shampoo she'd picked herself at the drugstore. And she held on for a moment with the particular grip of a child who has learned the difference between being held and being held onto, and knows which one this is. He heard footsteps in the doorway and knew without looking that Aurelia was there. He didn't look up. Ivy didn't either. They stayed in that moment for the duration it needed, and then Ivy stepped back and wiped her eye with the back of her hand in one quick motion, very matter-of-fact, and said, "I'm going to finish my reading," and walked back to the other room. Logan straightened up. His shoulder ached. His eyes were doing something he gave himself a moment to manage. Turned around. Aurelia was in the doorway. She had her hand over her mouth and her eyes were bright, and she was not quite crying, which he understood because he was also not quite crying. And they were both the kind of people who did not entirely know what to do with moments that were too full for their usual containers. She dropped her hand. "She's been working up to that for 2 months," she said. Her voice was unsteady. "She asked me about it in September. She said she didn't want to presume. She's 7. She's always been older than she should have to be." "Yeah," he said. "She has." Aurelia looked at him across the kitchen. Something moved through her expression, not the professional composure he'd seen first, not the controlled grief of the farmhouse, not the functional efficiency of the woman who had walked into a federal building with a USB drive and rebuilt her company from a compromised board structure in 3 months. Something simpler than all of that. "Logan," she said. "Yeah, thank you." She said it directly, without the discomfort that had been in it every time before, when it had always come with the shadow of the things she couldn't repay. This time she just said it, for stopping on Granger Street, for not calling anyone that night, for all of it, for staying. He looked at her. "You don't need to." "I know I don't need to," she said. "I'm saying it because it's true." He didn't have a clean answer. So he said, "Okay." And she almost smiled, and they stayed there for a moment in his kitchen with the sounds of their children in the next room. On Christmas Eve, exactly 1 year after Logan had braked hard on Granger Street and put his truck in park and walked towards something small beside a dumpster, the 4 of them drove across town in the dark. It had been Ivy's idea. She'd brought it up at dinner the week before, in the way she brought up most of her ideas now directly, with some preliminary reasoning already prepared, as if she expected to have to make a case and was pleasantly surprised when she didn't always have to. "I want to go back," she said, "to the street where you found me. And I want to bring things for kids who are out there this year." The table had been quiet for a moment. "What kind of things?" Danny asked. "Warm things," Ivy said, "and food, and maybe toys." She looked at Logan. "Is that okay?" "Yeah," Logan said. "That's okay." So they had spent 2 evenings that week assembling bags. It had become its own project, the kind that absorbs a household deciding what to include, Danny arguing for the inclusion of specific toys and Ivy making practical counter-arguments about utility, Aurelia ordering things online with the efficiency of someone accustomed to logistics, Logan finding an organization that coordinated outreach in the district and connecting them through Marcus, who knew someone, as he always did. They drove to Granger Street at 8 in the evening. The street was the same as it always was, the shuttered storefronts, the plywood windows, the line of dumpsters along the curb, awaiting the post-holiday bulk pickup. Christmas lights had been strung across the entrance of one of the warehouses that had been converted into some kind of events space, and they threw colored light across the pavement in red and green and white. The outreach coordinator, a woman named Sylvie, who had been working this district for 9 years and had the warm, unsentimental manner of someone who had long since stopped being surprised by either the worst or the best of what people did, met them with a van and 2 volunteers. They worked the street for 2 hours, moving through the district with bags and hot food and conversation, and Sylvie did most of the talking because she knew the people and the people knew her. And Logan and Aurelia and the kids stayed back and helped carry and handed things over when Sylvie indicated. Ivy was quiet through most of it. She watched. She helped when she could. At one point, a small child, maybe 5 years old, wrapped in a blanket beside a woman who appeared to be. Her mother looked at the bag Ivy was holding, and Ivy crouched down and held it out, and the girl took it carefully and looked inside. And the two of them were in that moment simply two small children regarding each other across a very short distance. Logan watched from a few feet away. He didn't say anything. On the drive home, Ivy was quiet in the back seat. Danny had fallen asleep against the window. Aurelia had her hand over the center console, and Logan's hand was on it, which had been true for a while now. Neither of them had formalized anything. Neither of them had made declarations. They were both people who were better at doing than announcing, and so they had simply moved closer over time until the distance was gone, and it hadn't required a conversation. "Are you okay?" Aurelia asked Ivy, turning around. Ivy looked out the window at the dark street passing. "I was thinking about Darlene," she said. Nobody said anything for a moment. She wasn't a good person, I don't think," Ivy said carefully. "She was paid to take me. She did it because of money." She paused. "But then she didn't give me back, and she wrote everything down. And she got that paper signed by the notary." She looked at her hands in her lap. "I don't know what to think about her," Logan said. "You don't have to have a clean answer about her." Ivy looked at him in the rearview mirror. "You don't? People are mostly complicated," he said. "She did something that hurt you. And she also did something that helped you, and both of those are true at the same time, and you're allowed to not know how to weigh them against each other." Ivy considered this for a while. The city went by outside the window. "I think she was scared," Ivy said finally, at the end. "And I think she did it anyway." Another pause. That must have been hard. Logan kept his eyes on the road. He didn't trust himself to say much. "Yeah," he said, "I think it was." The rest of the drive was quiet. Danny slept. Ivy leaned her head against the window and watched the lights go by outside. Aurelia's hand was warm in Logan's, and the car smelled like cold air and the remnants of the hot food they'd been carrying, and the radio was on low playing something neither of them had picked. He had not fixed everything. Ivy still woke up some nights uncertain of where she was. She still ate too fast sometimes, still startled at sudden sounds, still had appointments with doctor. Ellison that sometimes went hard. Aurelia still worked too many hours and had to be reminded to eat, and was learning, slowly, that a company you've built is not actually the same thing as a reason to neglect everything else. Danny was still 7, which meant he was still a small person generating large amounts of disorder and requiring more patience than Logan had on certain mornings. None of it was clean. None of it was finished. But there was a little girl with a pendant around her neck who had learned to argue with her brother and was thinking about joining the science club and had just crouched down on Granger Street to hand a bag to a 5-year-old who needed it. And that girl had said the word dad in a kitchen in November and meant it. And Logan had said she could call him whatever felt true. He thought about what it meant to stop. Not the grand gesture of it, not the way a story wanted to tell it, with swelling music and meaningful light, but the actual small mechanical fact of it. He'd been tired. He'd been running on fumes. He'd wanted to go home. He had almost kept driving, and the only reason he hadn't was because of 12 years of training that taught him to trust what his eye caught at the edge of his vision, and because something small had moved beside a dumpster, and something in him had recognized it. That was all it had been, one moment of not looking away. He thought about how many people drove past without stopping. He wasn't judging them. He didn't know what was in their cars, what they were carrying, what they'd already been through that day or that year. He wasn't special. He just stopped. He thought about what Darlene Marsh had done, alone in an apartment for 3 years, when stopping could have gotten her killed. He thought about Aurelia walking into a federal building with a USB drive, about Renata keeping careful notes about transfers that weren't her responsibility to track, about Marcus making calls on Christmas morning for a man who hadn't needed to ask twice. None of them had done anything extraordinary. They just stayed in the room. They just refused to leave the problem to someone else. He thought that was probably most of what goodness actually was. Not the large dramatic gestures, those were real too, but they were rare, but the daily, undramatic, often exhausting refusal to stop caring about something when it would have been easier and more comfortable to stop. He thought Ivy already understood this. He thought she had understood it since the first night, when she'd asked not to be sent back and had meant it as a request, not a demand, because she'd already learned that the world didn't owe her certainty. She'd just hoped. He'd been the one to stay long enough for hope to be worth it. He thought that was enough. He thought that was, actually, everything. The car turned onto their street. The houses had lights in the windows, the particular warm, interrupted light of families inside doing whatever they did on Christmas Eve, and Logan pulled into the driveway, and the engine went quiet. Danny woke up and looked around with the disoriented air of a child returning from unconsciousness, took in the driveway, and said, "Are we home?" "Yeah," Logan said. "We're home." Ivy was already unbuckling her seatbelt. She got out of the car and stood in the driveway for a moment, looking up. Sky was clear and cold and scattered with stars, the kind of sky you only got in winter, and the Christmas lights from the Kowalski house next door were making a warm, slightly uneven glow across the end of the driveway where she was standing. She looked up for a long moment, this girl who had slept beside a dumpster 1 year ago tonight, who had asked a tired stranger not to drive away, and had been waiting her whole small life for one person to say okay. Then she looked at Logan and she smiled, not a performance of happiness, not the careful, measured expression she'd arrived with. Just a smile imperfect, slightly lopsided, her own the kind that comes from somewhere real. Logan smiled back, and they went inside.